Comic book heroes are a staple of pop culture entertainment. The heroic personalities, the larger-than-life personas, the fancy costumes, the incredible origin stories, their villainous counterparts, their world is the definition of fantasy. Comic book heroes have been around for over 85 years, with Superman being the very first superhero since making his debut in Action Comics #1 back in 1938. Now ever since then, there have been countless superheroes who have made their debuts within the medium of comic books, and a number of these heroes would go on to worldwide success, expanding their status just beyond comic books and into other avenues, with TV being the most prominent. One of the more popular mediums where these characters would go to showcase their worlds was in animation. Over the course of several decades, there have been many animated shows based on comic book characters, and in today's video, I will be listing my top 10 favorite superhero animated shows. And I should just go ahead and state that basically it is animated shows from both Marvel and DC. There is the Invincibles animated show from Image Comics, but that's not what I'm going for here. More in line with the shows I've grown up with over the last 4 decades. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and list my favorite superhero animated shows of all time. Number 10. The Incredible Hulk. Kicking things off with everybody's favorite green raging monster, the Hulk. The adventures of Bruce Banner dealing with his alter ego, the Incredible Hulk. This was the Hulk's 3rd animated outing. It is set at a time when Banner is constantly on the run from the military lead led by Thunderbolt Ross. This situation is made all the more complicated by the fact that Banner is in a relationship with Thunderbolt's daughter Betty, which creates a very complicated but interesting dynamic. He also has to deal with the leader, a villain whom is determined to take the Hulk's powers and fuse it into him. With all of this going on against him, Banner unfortunately gets people close to him in danger's way, including Betty and his cousin Jennifer. During an attack by Dr. Doom, who seeks to capture the Hulk for his own nefarious needs, Jennifer is injured and is given a blood transfusion from Bruce, which leads to her transformation as She-Hulk. On top of Bruce's enemy encounters, he also comes across other Marvel characters making appearances throughout the show's run, including Iron Man, War Machine, Thor, Ghost Rider, Doctor Strange, and the Thing from the Fantastic Four, adding to the richness of the show and making it somewhat of a shared universe with all these other characters. The show had a serious edge to it during its first run. This, however, changed during the 2nd season with She-Hulk being added to the show. There was also a second Hulk, Grey Hulk, who was a less savage version to the regular Hulk. This shift in tone changed the feel of the show as it was slightly campy and light-hearted. Thunderbolt Ross ends up even giving up his pursuit of the Hulk, and the show ended after 2 seasons and went out on something of a very low-key note, which was disappointing. The 1st season is what makes the show worth watching, and the complete tonal shift for the 2nd season looking back after all these years is still a little baffling. But in any event, The Hulk is a decent show, and it sits as number 10 on my list. Number 9. Spectacular Spider-Man. Spectacular Spider-Man was Spider-Man's 7th animated show and one of his most memorable, albeit short-lived outings. This series takes place during Peter's high school years and is an adaptation of Stan Lee, John Romita and Steve Ditko's run in the comic books. Peter has only just recently become Spider-Man after being bitten by a radioactive spider. The show managed to keep some of the key elements of the lore of Peter Parker, including struggling to balance his newfound responsibilities of being a hero whilst dealing with his school and home life, his relationship woes with Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy, getting bullied by school jock Flash Thompson, his friendship with his best friend Harry Osborn, living with his Aunt May, working at the Daily Bugle for loudmouth publisher J. Jonah Jameson, all the usual Spider-Man traits we have come to know. But the show did make a few different choices in this iteration. The biggest change for me was the addition of Eddie Brock, whom in this world is something of an older brother figure to Peter and one of his best friends. This is a completely different dynamic between the characters, but there is a build up to how they grow apart and become enemies, with Brock eventually becoming the villain known as Venom. Gwen Stacy, also in this world, is something of a shy introvert who is not amongst the most popular girls, a bit of a change from what she was depicted in the comic books under the Lee, Romita and Ditko run, where she was more of the popular girl. Mary Jane, as we all know, is Peter's eventual true love, but in this show they are just friends and she is more of the party girl, accurately depicting that version here of what we saw in the comic books. On top of all this are the plethora of Spidey villains. The episodes were nicely paced and developed a lot of continuity with built-in story arcs. The action sequences were entertaining, there was a lot of character building with Peter's foes, and it was a very entertaining depiction of Spider-Man, which sadly only lasted 2 seasons of 26 episodes, but for the time that it was on, it was a very entertaining show. Number 8. Superman the Animated Series. In the world of DC Comics, Batman and Superman always existed in the same universe. And with Batman the Animated Series' great success, it was only a matter of time before Superman came along and was given his own show. Making its debut on September 6, 1996, this version of Superman paid tribute to both the classic Superman of old and the new modern version. Whilst Batman was dark and grounded more in reality, Superman was brighter and more flamboyant in a fantasy setting. And unlike Batman, who was already established when his show began, Superman the Animated Series starts with a 2-part story tracing his origins back to Krypton, with the planet exploding and his father Jor-El sending him to Earth and being the last survivor of Krypton. He's adopted by the Kents, and over time as he gets older, he develops his powers and eventually goes on to become Superman. He has quite an impressive rogue gallery and takes on several meta-powered villains. Lex Luthor is his main adversary despite not having any powers, but a lot of money, wit and cunning as he challenges Superman. There are a number of memorable villains like the energy-dreading Parasite, the human cyborg Metallo, whom is powered by kryptonite, which is Superman's source of weakness. Livewire, a former radio jockey who is accidentally infused with electricity. The Kryptonian AI robot Brainiac, the powerful Darkseid. These are just a handful of the enemies that he had to take on. This version of Superman is somewhat weaker to his comic counterparts, as he always seemed to get beaten almost easily at times by some of these villains. The producers have admitted that he was somewhat toned down, so he wasn't as powerful, which made for a more challenging dynamic for him against his foes. I found this a bit frustrating, as it was very similar to what was seen in Batman the Animated Series, when he would get taken out way too soon. But it proved that he could take a licking and keep on ticking. As well as taking on his enemies, he was living his life as reporter Clark Kent for the Daily Planet and dealing with his partner Lois Lane. Lane was into Superman, but she was not into Clark Kent, which made for a very interesting situation. The stories were very well written and produced, and the voice acting gave it a lot more gravitas. And given that it was the same team that produced Batman the Animated Series, this is really no surprise. All in all, this is a very well produced animated show and a great depiction of the Man of Steel. Number 7. Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Just like Spectacular Spider-Man, this was a very well entertaining written show which was cut short after only lasting 2 seasons at 52 episodes. It was based on the original comics run of stories by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. It was also around the time when the MCU was taking off, with Iron Man, Hulk, Cap and Thor all having their solo outings on the big screen, and therefore increasing the popularity of these characters. They take on some of the most dangerous supervillains in Baron Zemo, Kang the Conqueror and Ultron, to name a few. The animation, the tone and the pacing of the show really gave a whole new life to this group of Marvel characters. The stories were brilliantly written and the voice acting was very good. The action scenes were a lot of fun. There were interesting story arcs that built up over the course of its 2-season run. By the time I had gotten around to watching this series, the first Avengers movie had just come out, and that was the real catalyst for me getting into the Avengers as a whole, even though this show actually came out first. Over time I had revisited and watched the show, and it really is an underrated work of art. It even featured appearances from other Marvel characters like Spiderman and Wolverine. Speaking of which, there had been plans to bring the X-Men into the 3rd season and do an Avengers vs X-Men story arc, just like we saw in the comic books. Sadly, this never came to fruition. And on top of that, the show was replaced with the very awful Avengers Assembled, which was done to reflect the already established MCU movies by ensuring the base characters from the movie were featured, and what you got as a result was a vastly inferior show. Overall, Avengers EMH is an excellent series, and despite its only 2-season run, it managed to produce a brilliant showcase for Iron Man, Cap and Co. Number 6. Batman Beyond. The successor to the highly acclaimed Batman the Animated Series. The show is set in a futuristic Gotham about 20 years after Bruce decides to give up being Batman, as a rescue mission went awry and he nearly went against his moral code of never killing any of his adversaries. Enter Terry McGinnis, a young teenage delinquent whom by accident discovers that old Bruce Wayne was the original Batman. Terry suffers a major tragedy when his father is murdered by the villain Mr. Fix-It, working under his boss Derek Powers, who is the real mastermind behind the whole situation. Terry's father had discovered the illegal production of chemical weapons, and Powers had him taken out. Seeking vengeance, Terry returns to Bruce for help, but only gets told to go to the authorities. Terry refuses this, and he ends up stealing the Batsuit to carry out his own justice. Bruce reluctantly agrees to allow Terry to use the suit and take down Mr. Fix-It and Powers. The result sees Fix-It get his comeuppance, and Powers ends up becoming the villainous Blight after an accident. Bruce then decides to bring Terry into his world and serve as his chauffeur, which was a disguise to allow him to become the new Batman for the new futuristic Gotham. When the show was being conceived, the network executives were looking at a teenage Batman for kids. According to producer Bruce Timm, the pilot episode of this show is what was shown, much to the executives' horror. However, the show was allowed to continue, and thank goodness for that. The show was neo-futuristic looking with a very dark tone. The villains in this show were very outlandish and unique, with characters like Curare, Ink, Spellbinder, and the Royal Flush Gang. There were also encounters with some classic Batman villains like Mr. Freeze, Ra's al Ghul, and the Joker, but this was via Batman Beyond, the feature-length movie. Even better for this series was Kevin Conroy reprising his role as Bruce Wayne, but not Batman, as he serves in a secondary advisory role this time around, but he still plays a very important role. The honor for the new Batman went to voice actor Will Friedle of Boy Meets World fame. The legendary Adrian Romano voice directs this show, and it delivers on all fronts in terms of storytelling, voice acting, and action. It also served as a blueprint with the two-part story arc The Call, which paved the way for another future DC animated show in the Justice League. A very hard-hitting and brilliantly animated show, adding to the legacy of the Batman. Number 5. Spiderman TAS. My personal favorite Spider-Man cartoon of all time, making its debut in November of 1994 and running for 5 seasons at 65 episodes. This story did very well to adapt story arcs and characters from the comics and interpret them in this series. Unlike Spectacular Spider-Man, this show sees Peter enroll at Empire State University and try to balance his study life with being Spider-Man and taking care of his Aunt May, whilst navigating his friendship with best friend Harry Osborn and dealing with his relationship issues with Felicia Hardy and of course Mary Jane. Spider-Man can be credited with having one of the most interesting role galleries in superhero history. This show is stacked full of some of the most memorable villains, including the Kingpin, the Hobgoblin, the Chameleon, Alistair Smythe, Rhino, Scorpion, Carnage, Venom, and arguably his greatest foe, the Green Goblin. The show took time to build the background story arcs for a good number of these villains, and it added to the overall ambience of the show. There was also an abundance of guest stars from the Marvel Universe. Some memorable story arcs in this series include the Neogenetic Nightmare, which slowly saw Pete transform into a man-spider. There was the Secret Wars adaptation when the Beyonder selects Spider-Man and gets him to build a team with other Marvel heroes and take on some of the most dangerous foes in the Marvel Universe. There is also the final arc of Multiple Spider-Man, which saw Ben Reilly make an appearance on the show, able to do the funding. Regardless, it was an excellent showcase and is one of the most memorable. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you liked it, and if you want to see more, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.